Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our info session about ArtsForce, which ArtsForce is the name we gave our fiscal sponsorship program. And the reason we don't call it just fiscal sponsorship program is because we wanted to integrate a little bit more tools to help along the way with the fiscal sponsorship piece of it. There is still a lot of work that is on the participant, just because in terms of capacity. But I just wanted to ask real quick, just for managing expectations, does everybody have ideas? Okay. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, it's this, what's on the screen. But really, there's a couple of things where how the IRS considers it a fiscal sponsorship as well. So, as a nonprofit or 501c3, it's not really enough to just say, okay, we're a 501c3, now you can use our status. So typically it has to be mission aligned with our mission, which is connecting artists to the people's skills and resources. So that's pretty broad. And then it also means that for all intents and purposes, the project is a project of Sequel Atlanta. It doesn't mean, and we'll talk a little bit about this, that we necessarily control every aspect of it, but the way the IRS sees it, because it goes in through our income and it goes out through our expenses and our budget, it is our project. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So the way that it's been used in the past, say, like we've used it this way. For example, one of our sponsees is the Atlanta Maker Faire. And the Atlanta Maker Faire is just that. They're putting on a large Maker Faire indicator coming up this fall. And so they've been raising sponsorship dollars to support that. So when they get a sponsorship, say from Google or MailChimp, which they have, it comes to us and then we disperse the money to them. So that's really as a fiscal sponsor. We're not a fiscal agent, so we don't pay all of the bills for them. We don't have other legal accountability to the organization in certain ways. We are just fiscally sponsoring all contributed income. So does like you guys know what I mean by contributed, right? And this is actually something that I've had to clarify with one sponsee. So contributed to the IRS, and if you've given a tax deductible gift before, usually you get a thank you letter that says no goods or services have been exchanged for this contribution. So there's no quid pro quo. Like you're given a donation without the expectation of a good or service coming out of that. Now, if you have a component of your fiscal sponsorship program like selling tickets or merchandise, those are things that you do have to pay state taxes on and are not considered contributed income. That's earned revenue. So we're not talking about earned revenue. We're talking about donations where we can offer your donor, whether it be a corporate sponsor, foundation, or individual, a tax deduction. Does that make sense? So for the case of the Atlanta Maker Faire, they have a charitable purpose. They're looking at a fair that is open to the public. So we sponsor that fiscally. And they are working on getting their 501c3. So they already are a charitable organization. In the case of individual artists, we're not necessarily looking for you to go through the step of becoming a 501c3. You could be a sole proprietor, you could be an LLC, you could be an S Corp, you could be all of those different things, but the project itself has to have a charitable purpose. So what do I mean by charitable purpose? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I think we've covered some of these points. What is ArtsForce? We're the initial recipient of donations, just some important things to know. our mission, connect arts entrepreneurs with the resources, tools, and people they need to succeed. We consider this sort of the resources and tools and people portion of it. So if we're helping you connect to donors, those are people that help you with your artistic career. Also, resources being money, capital. So again, it aligns with our mission as a program. And then we're also looking at, the public good aspect. So as a 501c3 organization, we have a responsibility to the community to present services that have a public benefit. That can be very broad. It doesn't mean that you can't charge for them or everything is free. It just means that there's a sometimes intangible and tangible measure of what a public good is. Any questions?
It's just kind of a clarification. So it doesn't necessarily have to be if it's for a specific project. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the mission of the project aligns with your mission.
No, it should in some way. So if you're connecting other artists or paying artists to work on the project or something like that, you can again define those terms broadly. It should theoretically propel our mission and align with it. But again, our mission is specifically vague. And so the big piece of it is the public benefit. And we can take it on as a project of C4 by saying we're connecting, again, artists to these other resources, even if it means we're connecting to people like audiences or viewers. So in that way, in that regard, it does align with our mission. I mean, anytime that we can support a project where it's hiring artists to do work in the community, then we're connecting them to the resources they need for their career. Cool. Also, ArtsForce, in its current iteration, we're kind of going back and forth, but in its current iteration, if you're a member of ArtsForce or an ArtsForce member, there's also 2 other classes that we offer called fiscal sponsorship, not fiscal sponsorship, excuse me, Fundraising 101 and Financial Literacy 101. There are 101 series, and those are included. So, we do charge for those classes, but you wouldn't, as an ArtsForce member, have to pay for them. We encourage people to take them because we look at fundraising from a couple of different angles. We look at traditional fundraising, we look at crowdfunding, and then we bounce around ideas of how to do fundraising a little bit differently, or some things that people haven't really thought of in terms of fundraising. For financial literacy, we're really going through a lot of terminology that's sometimes found in sponsorship applications or grant applications, or just financial terms that people need to know anyway when they're managing money. And then we get into a little of the personal side of it. So how do you, a lot of times people want to separate their personal finances from their business finances, and sometimes as a freelancer that's really difficult to do. So we talk about negotiating around that, but also some type of reconciliation, so you're not feeling like you're all over the place with your finances. So your personal finances should be in line with your professional goals. So what ArtsForce is not, it's not a grant or a matching fund. I wish one day, but it is not right now. We cannot fundraise for you. You see Joe and you see me, and there's one other person who works with us part-time. That's the staff of C4, yay! So it would be, if you were expecting us to do the fundraising for you, you'd be really disappointed in what we could do. We'll give you the tools. We give everybody a toolkit. We give them a branding kit. We give them templates and things like that as in a package. We send that over to you to help you frame your fundraising goals. But the most successful campaigns to date have there have been people who've established relationships. We have one young lady who completed her goal, and she was just looking to raise over $2,000. She did that in like 2 weeks. And she did that by just contacting people she knew, going within her own networks and saying, hey, I'm working on this project, and I can offer you tax deduction. The Maker Faire today is raising $20,000 through us, and that's just been because they've gone the corporate sponsorship route because they can say the Maker Faire brings in a lot of people, a lot of eyes for your brand. So that's one way that they've been able to achieve that. We have another artist right now who's raising funds to supplement a grant that was given to her by the Atlanta Beltline. And I think she's only really looking at raising a couple $1,000s as well. And they seem to be on track to do that, but they're constantly getting that message out. And that's why we talk about that in that fundraising 101, to send a letter out and be like, hey, can you give me something? And then you don't hear from somebody again. You just go off people's radars. And it feels like you're bothering them, but what happens is people are like, oh yeah, I mean to give to that. And then they star it or pen it in their inbox, and then they don't look at it again. And then if they don't get a reminder, then it's like gone within their email feed. We also you can apply for grants. You know, there's not a ton of grants for individual artists, you know, outside of visual arts. There's a lot more in visual arts than there is, say, performing arts or other, so far that I've come across. And funders, I would say, particularly in our region, are not as apt to give to individuals as they are to organizations. There's just something about having an organizational model and a 501c3 that feels safer giving your money to, and it makes sense. But they're out there. We just sent out some information about a fund that will help artists, visual artists, ship their stuff from one gallery to another, or from their storehouse to a gallery. And so that they do require a fiscal sponsor. So that is one area where we could help. What we're really looking at is, I think for the, you know, I don't want to lead anybody astray and say, yeah, you can go and write a bunch of grants. But one thing that I would suggest maybe looking at is, you know, corporate sponsorship. Even if you know people at certain corporations and they're able to give, you know, $500 or something, I would look at individual donors as well. We'll talk more about that. So, true or false? If I make a project under ArtsForce, I have to give up my rights to the content. I know, right? What if I was sitting here, I was like, no, we own it. It's out. Some fiscal sponsorship programs actually do retain the rights to the art's project. Remember what I said, that the IRS considers this our project because it goes through our income and goes out through our expenses. So for all intents and purposes, it is our project, but we have no interest in retaining any of the rights to your work, replicating it in any way. So if you create the content, it is yours to keep, and that's even in our contract. There it is. I have creative control of my project, so I can change it from the initial application.
That feels like a medium. Is there something between true and false?
It is actually kind of a medium. Some things are going to change. You know, your budget may change, certain aspects of it. If it changes, any change that happens, you just have to let us know. Like we have an obligation again to keep our 501c3 status. So we want to just make sure that we're doing everything right, and so just let us know. If it
change the nature of the project.
Right, yeah, you don't want to change. So yes, so if you say that you're going to be doing a public art project and you end up doing, you know, something with dance underwater, then then I think you'd have to reapply, and we'd have to see a new strategy behind that. So you have to have raised money before you apply to ArtsForce. So is that true? You don't. It's false. What we're trying to do is actually create a platform to help artists learn how to raise money and look at a different revenue stream for what they may be doing, particularly with those projects that have a charitable goal or public good. There's a little bit of confusion here. So one of the things that we do require is if you're actually going to go apply for grants, that you have raised some money in the past. For a project. It doesn't have to be a large amount. I think it's just like we say at least $1,000 for a project in some way.
Does it matter how?
It doesn't matter how. It could be that you, like, it could have been you sold tickets or you've held an event before. We just want to look like see that there's a history. And the reason that we did that is because typically if you don't have that history and you apply for a grant, those foundations are not going to give you money if you don't have any history of raising money. So we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to get anybody's hopes up. One of the things, and we'll talk about it more, that we did create is a crowdfunding platform for this particular project. We'll get into that, I think, in a little bit, but it's aptly called ArtsForce. And it is it's a very easy, very user-friendly site, and we've had artists use that particular platform to raise money. And it's great because it goes into an account, we hold it for you, you close your campaign, we cut you a check. So, and then that way, you don't have to go worry about having a merchant service if you want to take credit cards. We even had an artist, I think before, host an event at our house and then just have like a laptop with the platform there, and then, people give money through that, like right there in person, which is another way to do it. C4 has done that as well. The membership is $100 annually. You can apply for as many projects as you want to under that $100. C4 Atlanta charges an 8% admin fee on top of that. This is a very intensive paperwork project for us. So the 8% just helps cover some of our costs. Really between even the $100 and the 8%, we're not even really covering all of our costs on this right now. We're looking at actually applying for funds to help subsidize that. The one thing I will say about the 8% is if you use our crowdfunding platform, we don't charge another 3% on top of that for merchant fees. So we've looked at partnering with Indiegogo. We've looked at Kickstarter does not do charitable projects, but looking at like Indiegogo and some others, we come out better having our own platform, and hopefully you come out better as well, because unlike Kickstarter, you don't have to have all 100% of your pledges to keep the money. That's where Indiegogo and Kickstarter kind of differ. And in Indiegogo, if you don't meet your total goal, they charge you more for the merchant fee. So the 8% covers that. Any questions? And like as I mentioned before, the ArtsForce classes are usually $35, but they're free to ArtsForce members. The other thing too, our regular annual membership is $40, so this is $100. So it's a membership that comes with all the other benefits of the regular membership as well. So it's not the completely separate thing, and then you have to go and pay for another one on top of it. So applying for ArtsForce, the first step is the ArtsForce membership, the online application. Right now we moved to a quarterly system. So if you have a project that you desperately need to start raising funds for now, talk to me later. But we moved to quarterly again because this is a very time-intensive project for us. Our board has to actually accept all of the applications and approve them as a project of C4. So we have to make sure that we aren't constantly inundating them with projects. So the next deadline for the application is October 15th. But as I said, because we're in this kind of transition period, we were taking them every month. I think it was like the 15th of every month we were taking applications, and now we've gone to quarterly. So if there's something that is absolutely pressing that you need to have before October 15th, talk to me and we'll work that out. So sponsored projects. So you turn in the application, we approve it. Sometimes we have sent back applications and said we see a little bit of a problem with your budget. We only see expenses and no income. So, or do you really think that it's reasonable that you can raise this amount of money? So we actually are looking at everything and giving tips for making a stronger proposal. At the end of the day, we can't, You know, if you say you're going to raise $20,000, we're not going to call you every day and say, hey, how's your goal coming along? You know, once the project is complete, you do have to submit a final report to us. And again, these are all things that we do to make sure that we're staying compliant with the IRS. So if you were to go to our homepage today, this is where you would find all of the information about ArtsForce. My apologies for all the legalese. This took consulting 3 different attorneys, who were all very great. Georgia Lawyers for the Arts helped us out with this pro bono partnership, and then another volunteer attorney helped us with the information, making sure that we're putting it together, not only to protect us, but making sure that we're putting something out there that's usable for artists and is to their best interest as well. So again, if you were inside the page, this was where the application would be. There's some general information. That's the top part of the application. We do ask a lot of questions. One of the things, again, that we have to ask for is a budget. We do ask a little bit about your marketing plan. We want to know how you're going to raise the money. You know, that's important. So be like, I'm going to, you know, I want to raise $20,000, but you have no idea how you're going to raise that. You know, we want you to take a step back and really think about that. I will say this, you know, for an organization like C4 Atlanta that's been around for almost 5 years, raising $10,000 is not an easy feat. You know, there are other organizations, there are other projects that we've had, like the Atlanta Maker Fair, that have had a little bit more in terms of their connections. So their team has had really great connections to the corporate world. And I would say that that's probably not going to be everybody that applies to this project. You can raise $10,000. It just takes a lot of work, and it takes a very strategic way of thinking about how you're reaching out to people from multiple angles. So just putting stuff on Twitter isn't probably going to cut it. Most of the we put out a survey last year, and we asked people, you know, what they wanted to raise, and most of the projects were, the average was about $5,000. Film projects, I don't know if you guys are looking at like a film project. Sort of. I mean, that may be more, and that may be completely reasonable, just depending on how you are planning on going about obtaining the money. I know, you know, Fractured Atlas is another fiscal sponsor, and they, you know, I think have sponsored a lot of documentaries or independent films, things like that. So it really depends on the scope of the project.
Then that leads to my question. Can you do this with more than one country at once? And are there any benefits to it, or should I have asked this when you're done?
No, let me think about that. Let me think about that. Because I want to dig in a little bit more and ask why that would be the case. So again, more of the application. We'll send this to you. We'll send the slides to you guys afterwards, so that way you can reference them if you need to. But again, it's all on the website. It's pretty straightforward. You may have some questions about some of the application information, but you know, always feel free to email us. More of the it's a long application. Yay! Okay, so if you are using crowdfunding, there's that term, you know, best practices. So best practices for crowdfunding tends to be a 30 to 90 day campaign. Anything more than 90 days, if people are like just in the project already. 30 days is fast and furious, you know. So a 90-day campaign, I think for most of the campaigns, they're like something like Power to Give that we've used, maybe like a 90-day campaign. And what happens is that you typically come out of the gate like with a lot of energy and saying, okay, yeah, let's raise money. In that middle part, you may like plateau a little bit, and then people are like, oh my God, I got to raise all this money before the deadline. It is good having a deadline. There's something psychological about it, like even people giving, you know, you always have that person that'll help bookend you. You know, they see like you have $75 to go, and they're like, oh, I'll take care of that for you. You know, So my suggestion would be to just, if you are doing something like crowdfunding, is keep it interesting. The project right now that Rose and her partner Margaret are working on, and they're using our site, they're giving like daily updates on their project. So they're kind of documenting the process of creating the pieces for the Beltline exhibition. So it's, if you have video works, I think 30%, you get 30% more response with like video. So, different things that you can send out to people to keep them engaged, and giving them rich content to attach to. You don't want to be gimmicky, of course, but get people excited about what it is that you're doing. Again, there's that, I think we say this in a lot of our classes, but people they're not driven by logic. So if you give them a lot of facts and figures, nobody cares. But they are driven by emotion. So we make purchasing decisions, giving decisions, voting decisions on emotion, unfortunately, and then we justify with logic. So we just, after the close of the campaign, you got to give us some time to turn around the money for you. We just have to track it, and so usually we say it's within 2 weeks after your campaign closes or that you've raised money or a check comes in. Just because, if I'm out of town or something comes up, I want to make sure that you have reasonable expectations that the check's not going to be cut the next day. So again, I mentioned the final report. Within 30 days, we send like a one-pager. It's like a 1.5-pager final report. We just ask you some questions. How did it go? What do you think were some strengths and weaknesses? Is there any anecdotal stories that you want to share with us as a result of the project? And it's also a time to give us feedback on how everything worked as well. So I even pared it down even more yesterday. So I try to keep it very simple. I do final reports all the time. So I just want to make sure that we just have some feedback. I mentioned this before. If you are going to apply for grants, just show us that you've had some type of effort in the past to, or successfully have raised $1,000 in the past towards a project. Again, your funder wants to see a history of raising money. If you have that foundation who's ready to pull the trigger for you and they don't care, then we'll talk about that. We talked about this idea of being a public good, so I wanted to kind of define that. We won't read every single bullet point, but the IRS has very specific criteria for public good, and these are just some of the examples. So, exhibitions that are free and open to the public, anytime you throw in education, even if it's like subsidized, so maybe you want to teach a class in schools and the school can only give you $500 and you want to raise the rest of the money for it, so you can make it a low cost or free event. It can't be commercial in nature. So what I mean is this isn't for a gallery opening. So I don't care if you sell, you just will be responsible for your own taxes. But it won't support the creation and selling of that work. What it will support is maybe an open public exhibition of that work. Right. Film, documentaries, free open screenings. So the film that you create may not be a documentary, but if you wanted to raise money for an open screening or a free screening, you could do that as well.
It may be a documentary.
Maybe a documentary. What I'm saying is it might not be a documentary, but if you did a free screening, that could be considered a public good. Does that make sense? So you could, look at what it would cost to actually host a screening and raise the money for that if you wanted to screen a film and make it open to the public. Publishing books that serve educational, charitable purposes. This last one, this is one that I think Deb put in there and may be wrong. Engaging in professional development, which can include residencies and retreats. That one we'd have to look into more. If you were raising money, for example, for scholarships to attend one of your classes, that could be charitable in purpose. But if you're raising money for scholarship for yourself personally, that would not be considered a public benefit, because the only beneficiary of that is going to be you. But say you want to offer art classes or an engagement workshop or something like that, then you could raise scholarship money for that to offset. You can even raise money to offset tuition, still charge tuition. It has to be some type of making it accessible.
Be this for us, at least that we're offering to somebody.
Well, threshold development, which include residence entries. It's a tricky one. Yeah, I think for if we would just have to look into that a little bit more. Again, you can submit your application when you're ready. We'll be reviewing applications quarterly, just so you know. So you don't have to wait until October 15th to submit your application. You could go ahead and start submitting it now, but the deadline is October 15th for this quarter. Again, some of this information needed to be updated because we've been in transition of changing some of these. So proposals are not reviewed on the 10th day of each month. They'll be reviewed, they'll be due on the 15th, so probably by the 20th we can approve everything. We just have to give some time for what we typically do with our board of directors is we give them all the projects. We as staff review all the projects, look at them, we look for public benefit, we look at their budget, we look at the marketing plan, and then we submit that as a slate to our board, and then give them all the information and say, do you improve these projects? And at that time they ask questions, or sometimes they're just like, yeah, everything looks great. So. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm sorry about the misinformation there. That definitely needs to be updated to make sure that we have the new correct information. But again, as I mentioned before, and I don't mind reiterating, if there's a project that you really need to get up and running before October 15th, let me know. We're transitioning from this monthly acceptance to a quarterly acceptance. So that's kind of, in summary, it's a membership. It includes classes. The benefit of this is that you can offer individuals a tax-deductible gift up to the fullest extent allowed by law. And then we also provide a crowdfunding platform. Like I said, we don't really do the marketing for you, but we have no problem sending this out, and talking about people's projects. We just can't do the donor outreach. So we do use some of our social media reach and some of our networks to talk about people's projects. And as we have more active projects, probably half a dozen or so projects that have all been accepted, but just a handful of active projects. So once they become active, then we share with other people. So if you wanted to join ArtsForce today and you are a new member, you can use this code C4Friend and it gets you $40 off. So you just pay $60 for the membership. So, questions?
The $1,000, do we need to have done fundraising before?
So I think you may have come in a little bit later.
Yeah.
No, you don't. So let me clarify this because I know it can be a little confusing. You don't have to have fundraised before to participate in the program. If you're writing a grant and say you don't have a history of grant writing, then we ask that when you write a grant, you demonstrate that you've had some history of raising money before you write a grant. And the reason we put that stipulation in place just for grants not for raising money through other means. So you could do an event, you could do crowdfunding, you could do letter campaign.
I see.
Yeah, the reason is most foundations won't. We actually borrowed that information from Fractured Atlas because that was something that they got back, information and feedback that they got back from foundations. They said basically quit sending artists to apply for grants that they're not ready to handle. So a foundation, they're not going to give you $10,000 typically if you've never handled $10,000 before.
So if we did crowdfunding and we raised $3,000, then we applied for a grant, we could use that to say,
You'd raise $3,000, and that would be a great way to use it, yeah. Now, one of the things that they say about, funders, if you've met one funder, you've met one funder. So if you have established a relationship with some, foundation, independent foundation, or corporate foundation, and they say, yes, we're ready to give money towards this, then that's a completely different story. This fiscal sponsorship is definitely not a new concept. It hasn't, the reason we started it in this region is because we've seen it as a really underutilized tool for artists and arts organizations raising money. There's a lot of this done out in LA and a lot done in New York. In fact, Fractured Atlas, I think, last year brought in $12 million for artist projects last year. So, our goal for the whole year is 100,000, which is nothing compared to 12 million. We ever, a would be $1 million in artist projects that we could help support, which would be awesome. But it's just a different way of looking at how can I raise money, and also for the donor, give them a tax deduction, give them that nod. The other thing too is if people give to our organization, we give out the letter, the first letter of, so the first contact they'll have is from us, because we give them our employment identification number and the tax receipt, so that part of it's taken care of. And then we give any donor that gives through our crowdfunding campaign that's collected by us, we give to you. So typically we give that at the end of the campaign. We just put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and then we encourage you to follow up with them and to keep them engaged.
But actual tax letters, you guys send those, or no?
Yes, yeah. If they give through our crowdfunding campaign, they get it automatically. It comes right back to them as soon as they give. But as far as cool thank yous and follow-ups, we don't do that. But
Or is building a relationship?
yes, yeah. You guys should definitely take advantage of building a relationship with the donor. So what projects? Does anybody have projects in mind that they're thinking about, they're mulling over?
I would like to supplement that One Region grant that I just won, because it's quite a large mural that I put in for, and it's a lot of community outreach and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. It's already been a lot of work.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
we haven't even started the implementation yet, so I
Yeah.
would like to supplement just to pay me and my
Yep.
other artist
Yep.
a
And then-
true fee for.
Yeah, you actually made a good point. So for your budgets, I would suggest at least 20% of your overall budget be towards paying yourself. So, in fact, in applications to other funding entities, one of the mistakes that people make is not putting in a line item to pay themselves. So you want to, I think that's what Rose is doing right now with the Atlanta Beltline funding, is basically raising individual donations to supplement what she got through that. We have no problem with that, and apparently the Beltline doesn't either. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at this for like 2015 or beyond, because we we just pulled our first initial meeting. I'm trying to get this equipment moving, and somehow we've gotten rappers and hip hop people from the forefront to reach out. So it's exciting because we have these rappers wanting to support women's community movement. But it's like, we have to really get credibility too. So the first thing is we still have to write out a mission statement and everything. And everybody has these crazy schedules, or you're on tour, or doing this or that, and we can't get a meeting together. So I'm actually going to, like, hang out and then talk about it and then get some stuff on paper.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about how this is gonna play in a year from now, or more, but this is kind of where we're at, is getting people together, and then we have to do this, our mission statement and everything, just the real basic foundation stuff even.
Mhm.
But it's exciting because everybody has these, valuable networks, so we wanna position them to say, hey, you can totally be a big masculine, black man and support women's rights and stuff. So we wanna position them as role models and stuff too. So.
Mine's a music project, and it's not really performing arts, it's more education.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I need some instruments to go into at 2 levels, elderly people and children, to teach them org music education, basically.
Right.
And the instruments cost about $4,000 up front. And then I could charge for some classes, and I could give scholarships too, but I don't have that upfront money.
Yeah.
That's what I need.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you can also do is phases of fundraising as well. So the first phase may be you need to raise funds to purchase this equipment for this cause. And then the second phase may be you want to raise money for scholarships, or maybe even paying other instructors or whatever. So yeah, that's, I will say this, there's one thing that, I know that this is not what you're looking for, but you remind me of it. We can't take in-commissions on behalf of artists. We could probably figure it out some way, but it would be incredibly convoluted. Actually, purchasing equipment, that might be a gray area too.
I wondered about that.
We could talk more about it. What we, I can't make any promises, but I want to, again, because it's our project, it's our equipment. That's the way the IRS sees it. Now, one thing we could do is if you raise the money, got the equipment, we could sell it back to you for like $1 or something like that, and give you a bill of sale. But it's not something that we are doing across the board.
Got it.
Just because, again, even in a lot of government grants, equipment purchasing is not something that is typically covered. And I think it's because of that reason, because of the ownership of equipment is in question, and then it becomes kind of a sticky, weird area. But we can talk more about it.
So in general, budgets for any of these projects, again, you'd have to look more specifically at everything I know, but it should be things like paying artists, maybe getting an artist to a location, but not like,
It could
like
be.
if we needed camera equipment, we wouldn't want to go do the fundraising through
Right.
that, because then it gets into that situation.
Yeah.
But if we needed.
Now, you could do rentals. Renting is different than owning. So if you had to rent like a crane or something like that for a project, paying staff is definitely administrative costs, marketing costs would be covered, because it would be considered outreach, and so forth. So things like equipment, it just gets into a weird area for the IRS and us.
This is something really interesting to me about the phases. For those phases you covered under the one, or would that be after you reviewed your application? Would you do one phase and one iteration with ArtsForce and another phase in the next?
It would probably be separate applications, but you wouldn't have to pay the $100 over again. That's just an annual fee.
Okay. So quarterly, like one phase would be the first quarter and the second.
It could be that way, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A bit kind of related to that, it had said that creature, the flat screen, had said, like generally projects are like 3 to 12 month projects. So if it's an ongoing project, then what you would apply for the fiscal sponsorship would be like, whatever phase lasts 3 to 12 months.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I would put an end date on it. And the reason is, even our own insurance company, which is through the Alliance of Nonprofits, doesn't really like this whole extension of a 501c3 because they're like, when are they going to get their own 501c3? So we would look at it as separate projects that we would be funding, not we're extending our 501c3 to you indefinitely.
Right.
I'm kind of concerned about the controversialness of what I've been doing. Because it's open to interest, but it's closed doors. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially with like, I make flowers out of farm magazines. It's kind of like how I got into it, and then I'm expanding it to try to get men to support the women's movement through that. So,
Well, in terms of public good, they can't necessarily dictate morality. Again, in defining, going back to what defines those things as, a public good, if you're doing an exhibition of your work that's free and open to the public, that's of a public benefit. And the piece that I would focus more on for you is not just the merit of the artwork. I'm not saying that that's not important, but for this as a public good, you're really looking at educating the public about, women's rights or an issue that's controversial.
because we're getting together like creative people who want to say that there's a strong social impact with our creative voice, and we're getting like poets together and people from all walks of life, rappers, musicians. We want to use our creative voice to make social impact through our individual media. So that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and you said you're looking at 2015, so a lot can change between now and then, and I think the best answer I could give you is when we look at your project, one of the things that we would be looking for is what is that public benefit. I'm not, again, when we look at projects, I'm not looking at necessarily the artistic merit of a project, but I'm looking for the public benefit
Like I've had
piece.
HRD nonprofit involved. We've got a lot of community people, and I told myself we won't just want to do this. We need to propose a measurable result. That's what I want, a measurable result. Like
Yeah.
before we did this happened. After this is what happened. Okay, excited.
So I own a family theater company, and I also work for an artist collective. And I am probably will decide what the first thing I will be, but we're launching our education initiative at the campus this summer, and we're doing our school year programming. Of course, the issue is always paying our artists comparable, a fee that works well, and I worked for the largest nonprofit theater in the region for about 12, 15 years, so my ideas of what's good are a little lofty.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to honor what other artists need in order for them to do the work well, and also be able to eat and pay rent. So, possibly supplementing our residencies and their fees, but also the other option on my plate is creating a festival for families in the South Wilton area, where that particular community doesn't often get the quality of the actual performance that we get in town or north.
Right.
And so the goal, of course, of doing that maybe, of course, to introduce them to theater, but also let them know this is happening around Atlanta. So once you leave this, visit these theaters as well.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like there's multi phases there, and definitely, having and paying artistic fees as part of your project. So you may have, part of your project where you're going to charge a ticket price or something like that. But if you can say that, we are paying, we're offsetting that cost or supplementing that cost through donations to make ticket price lower. I mean, let's face it, like if you go to, a local theater company, you may only be paying 20% of each ticket of what it actually costs to produce. So there's precedents for that all over the place, so that's definitely considered by the IRS and a public benefit.
I think that's a really exciting, a real need.
Can I ask that fiscal sponsorship question?
Yes, yeah, good.
So you wanted to ask me. I actually don't know. I'm curious, only because Fracturalis is so large, I don't understand whether having two or one would make a difference. That's why I was asking you.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on, if you're using a crowdfunding site, it makes your fundraising possibilities a little bit more infinite, not widespread. Fractured Atlas has been doing it for a long time, and they have this down and they do it really well. Again, they are a national-based organization, so you may have that reach. I think what we try to do in terms of differentiating this particular program from theirs is making it a little bit more local grown. And so and because of that, we want, and pretty much in everything that we do, we want to get to know the artists who are behind the work in Atlanta and the region. And so we want to provide that support network. And classes and things like that is just part of it. So that would be one piece that we would offer. I mean, my inclination is to say no, but I would have to think about why I would say no. Yeah. Maybe it's just because for me it just is confusing.
So was the question, can you be fiscal sponsored by two different
organizations? Yeah, and I don't know if there's weird legal ramifications or anything like that. They may have
whose project is it? I mean, I guess it would cover that.
There's that. So whose project does it fall under? Again, that it would be that kind of the way the IRS looks at it and extending that 501c3. Is it Fractured Atlas project or is it C4's project? Yeah, it may just be like you start, if you wanted to do one project phase and that's the project, with us and one with them, you could see how it works. If they're better, then go with them,
Well, especially if you're starting locally and expanding, it would seem.
Yeah.
Starting locally is
Well, I'm new. This is very, very new, very green. So I'm just asking all kinds.
Yeah, no, that's a good question to have. It's a very interesting question. Yes, I think again that the fundraising piece of it, no matter which organization that you are working with, the onus of the work is going to be on you. So just in terms of managing expectations, no matter whether you go with Fractured Atlas or C4 Atlanta, the communication strategy is going to be yours. They may have a platform through Indiegogo, which is great because it gets. But to be honest with you, how many times do we really go to a platform and say, I'm going to support a bunch of projects today. Let me see which one catches my attention, yeah. Anything else? Anything else? I will say this, and you guys, I don't mean to be Debbie Downer now. I should have mentioned this earlier, but again, it's a change. For large projects, and really we're kind of looking at for any project, so we may change this. We do want people to have general liability insurance. Have general liability insurance, particularly if you're working with large equipment or other people, children in the public sphere, and there are, I've heard from a couple artists, you can get it as low as $30 a month, and this is where I would say go to Fractured Atlas. Because they do offer public art insurance, teaching artists insurance. They have brokers there that can help and that know artists really well. As a fiscal sponsor, because it is our project, if anything were to happen within your project and you were liable, then we could also be liable, if that makes sense. So what we ask is that you carry general liability and have C4 Atlanta named as an additional insured, and that doesn't cost you any extra money to name extra people, unless it just adds on another project. But to name people, like you would just tell your broker, and we have the language that you need. So, you know, again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA. I would just say Jessica advice and not C4 advice is that general liability is not a bad idea, especially if you're not incorporated. You know, if somebody gets hurt in your project, and even if it's something as they're not going to sue you, but maybe they, you know, hurt their wrist or broke a bone or slipped on a floor, it's happened before. It's happened to good companies in this region even. Paying for somebody's medical bills, you know, now you're talking about, you know, $5,000 to $10,000, you know, for a hospital visit, and if you're not incorporated, guess who pays for that? You. So if you do have something like general liability insurance, you either pay, you know, it's like I heard one attorney talk about this, it's like you either pay a little bit now or you pay a lot later. So there's a lot, like I said, if you have more questions about that, let me know. I'm not suggesting that you do this, but I know that some artists in the past have had general liability for the project duration and then have canceled. I'm not saying that you necessarily need to do that, but an annual policy, you know, as I've said from other artists I've heard, could be like $30 a month. And you don't need to go to, that's why I say go to Fractured Atlas, because you don't need to go to a broker that's going to just layer on all these things that you really don't need. Protect yourself.
And then where do we get all these slides?
Well, I'll email you the slides, but if you're looking on our website, all of this is from the homepage.
I feel, you may have already answered this, so of the applications you received, what's the percentage accepted? That's my really question.
Really, so far, we've accepted all of them. And the reason is because if we see a problem, we'll let you know and just have you adjust the application. Yeah. And that's happened a couple of times with projects where, you know, something in the budget was a little weird or we wanted more clarification on their marketing plan. So we're not trying to, you know, again, and then even when our board is looking at it, they're looking at more from a liability standpoint and a support standpoint. None of them are going to be like, can we see samples of their work? You know, they don't have the time even really to do that, and they just want to make sure that it's solid and that we're, you know, fulfilling our mission by supporting you in the best way possible.
Yeah. Really, a lot of pretty much everyone who's applied has worked with us and asked a bunch of questions before they went through and filled out and submitted the application. So
Yeah.
by the time you get to the point of getting to the page to submit the application, a lot of the stuff that you need to know, you already know.
Yeah, and the way that our form works is, I think there's a worksheet on there with all the questions that you can answer ahead of time, and I would suggest that you do that. The way that our form works is when you're ready to apply, I would suggest go ahead and write everything else in like a Word doc and then copy paste and submit, because ours right now doesn't save as you go. We're not that fancy. But we do have a worksheet that you can use, and I would suggest having that for your records anyway.
Well, I'm excited because it's just like, it's like, you know, I'm really green at this too. Like, if you don't know, if you're willing to know, by the end of it, you will know. And you know, C4, I just almost feel like, you know, I love it that self-motivated people do well here, you know, because it's just really, you know, you're willing to do the work, and you guys are always accessible to any questions, any feedback, and that's what's so great about that. To have that feedback to say, okay, this is what you need to work on. If you work on it, then, you know, if you want the project back, you guys are willing to do the work. I think that's just really, I appreciate that, because it really, from my experience, I've never had a nonprofit go above and beyond, you know, to really fulfill any need for me, yeah.
Keep talking, no. I appreciate the sentiment, I do, yeah.
No, I'm just like, do you recommend that we take these classes before we write our proposal?
Some people have, yeah, some people have, and that's perfectly fine. And when I send you guys all the information, I'll send you the code to the C4 Friend. If you want to go ahead and join and start taking the classes first, again, they're no extra charge. The fundraising class, I think, is good, and that one's coming up pretty soon. So every other month we do, I think, a different class. This month we're going to be doing the fundraising. Next month we'll do the financial literacy class. I would say the fundraising one may give you a good, fundraising and marketing are always so tied together that it may give you some good ideas for marketing as well. Because we try to cover a lot of different types of fundraising. And even some of them have been other ideas that we've gotten from other artists who've been at the table who said, okay, well, I've done this and this worked really well for raising funds. The other thing too, real quick, that we don't do for this is for our crowdfunding site, which a lot of you are probably used to, is we don't encourage to give out rewards. Like, if you want to get like a cool thank you card, awesome. I have philosophically a problem with rewards, and that is you could end up spending a lot of money.
Yeah, well,
And
the point of rewards on those sites is that it's not a tax deductible donation.
It's not a tax deductible. So that's
So
the
that's
second
very
part,
similar
yeah. You'd have to say, okay, if you're going to get a t-shirt and for a $25 donation, really only $5 of that is tax deductible. Or 15 or whatever it costs you to make or order a t-shirt. So I think I'd rather, and hopefully your donors would rather you spend the money on your project and not making people gifts. Cool thank you cards. You can be as creative as you want to with the thank you card. Videos, you could even do a thank you video. Cool. Or you could raise money. What did that kid raise money for? For potato salad.
He was so angry.
I saw a lot of
He was like,
people
you got $59,000 for potato salad, I can't get 500.
Yeah, I saw that. But you know what? I was like, the right timing, the right market.
And it's funny.
It's funny.
It's funny. People, like you said, they're not swayed by logic or fact.
Yeah.
They're swayed by emotion.
People will give for potato salad. Did you guys see all that about? Yeah.
I saw of it, I didn't read it.
Yeah.
My son